Shalom TV's coverage of the 10th anniversary Limmud conference is made possible in part by a grant from Dr. Naomi Vilko, in honor of her mother, Olga Vilko, and in memory of her father, William Vilko.
I want to start our session by talking about an incident that happened to me roughly 20 years ago. I was in the army at the time, very idealistic about trying to connect different types of Jews together across religious and political divides. And this was months before Rabin's assassination. And very few people remember, but there was a huge amount of conflict over the Bar Ilan road. Open, closed, they cut down certain key neighborhoods in Jerusalem. So my friends and I, that I had tried to cultivate both within the secular world through my army friends and my ultra-Orthodox friends, people that it was important for me to reach out to. So we got together and we decided to do a little bit of activism. We put together this beautiful poster of basically the land of Israel with a huge crack, which was called Ilan Street, going down the middle of it as if it was two different societies being split through this kind of rift, with all the slogans of what each side was saying against the other one. And we put it up around the city on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av. And we talked about how once upon a time, the 9th of Av was a day of destructive conflict where lots of people, the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of this. What is the lessons we learned from our history? Make a long story short, around, I don't know, the 70th poster we hung up, we were called into the police. They called us over and said, we love what you're doing. Do you have a permit for what you're doing? We're like, a permit? Are you kidding me? We're trying to save the Jewish world from destroying itself. I had not even thought, we were just, putting up all these signs. So it's been a 20-year journey of thinking about what would it mean to bring in a culture of the larger field of conflict resolution, of healthy conflict, as a core component, as a core Jewish value, practice, and part of our identity across religious and political divides. So many years later, I've now finished my doctorate in religion and conflict resolution. I've been teaching at Pardes for 15 years, which speaks to these kind of values. And we've developed a center that I spoke about yesterday at my session, that is developing educational materials for schools, for Hillels, training programs for federations, for rabbis, for lawyers, a whole bunch of things. And then we hit a point a year ago where we said, okay, this is great, but if we really want to try and have these values and practices become core to Jewish identity, we need to try to do some kind of game changer. We need to do something that everybody at the exact same moment will, in their own way, bring these very Jewish concepts into their communities, across religious and political divides. So we started thinking about, okay, what would be a right day? What would we call it that everyone could be engaged in? In essence, every Jewish holiday has something to do with conflict resolution. I mean, Yom Kippur, we could talk, it has to do with forgiveness. And obviously Tisha B'Av, but it's not during the school year. And people are always going to debate what's the essence of it. Yitzhak Rabin Day in Israel, many people have tried to promote it as a day of a culture of conflict. The problem is there's so much conflict over if it should be a day devoted to the culture of conflict that nobody actually is able to have it really become exactly what it needs to be. So we felt that there was a need to create or to recreate something that's always been there, no one's ever heard of, but it's ancient enough that no one's going to say we're just inventing something out of scratch. So we tried to pick this day, as we're going to talk about in a little while, called 9 Adar. And we called it the International Jewish Day of Constructive Conflict in English. In Hebrew, it's called Yom Machlok L'Shem Shamayim. And I'll just say as a point of reflection about theories of social change within religions, is that when thinking about what would be the right language, what do you call this day once you pick a date? So, it's like, think about if we had called this day International Jewish Day of Peace. Okay, how many Jews across religious and political divides would actually sign in and say, this speaks to us? My theory, and I didn't try it, okay? My theory is there would have been approximately 3 Jews who would have signed up, and they would have had a tremendous day of conflict over what the day is all about. Okay, if we had called it International Jewish Day of Harmony, it would have sounded absurd. For whatever reason, Jews, if there's one thing we don't disagree upon, I'm convinced it's that we all really, really like to disagree. That's very safe for us. Machloket is a very non-threatening word for Jews. Peace, on the other hand, has become, unfortunately, a very threatening word for certain people. Okay? So, what I want to explore with you in our brief time together is looking at the 3 chapters of the story of this day 9 Adar. Okay? And from there to explore, okay, what are the theories, values, and practices of how we can create a little bit of a social revolution in terms of where Jewish identity and where Jewish communities are going. And I'll just say, and I said this again in my session the other day, is that my starting point is that as a Jewish community, we have become very excellent advocates for our sense of justice and our sense of truth. And we do a great job of perceiving the other side that disagrees with our sense of justice and truth as being quite crazy and valueless. And we point our texts of justice and our truth at the other one and end up finding ourselves in this ideological entrenchment. Okay? So I believe that if there has been this wave of social justice and tikkun olam that's happened over the last couple of decades within Jewish communities, in Jewish schools, and shuls, part of the concept of what we're doing here at Pardes with our organizational partners around the world is conflict resolution, machloket l'shem shamayim, being a rodef shalom, and these type of values should become core components of what does it mean to be Jewish in the 21st century. Okay, so what I want to do is to start off by experiencing a little bit of chapter 1. Chapter 1 is a story that I think most people have heard of, okay, which is the healthy conflict between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. So what I want to ask that we do for just a few minutes is study the famous Mishnah that describes the relationship between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai in Chavruta, because Chavruta, after all, it's not just the Pardes way of studying, but Chavruta is the most important indigenous Jewish model of conflict resolution training. Okay? It's when 2 people put a text between them, they engage in very serious conversation of listening, learning, asking questions, becoming curious in a respectful way. So what I want us to do is to split up into 2 or 3s, okay? Put the text of the Mishnah on the table, and I want you to try to come up with every single possible question you can come up with on this text, okay? And what we'll do is, as we open up the different questions on this text in Pirkei Avot, is we're going to use those questions as an entry place into, and not just us, but the commentaries did this, into what can be healthy about conflict. What is the Jewish model of constructive conflict? Okay, so through the text study, we're going to come up with what are the basic guiding principles that communities and individuals need to hold to in order to have a healthy clash of ideas. Okay? So we're going to just take a few minutes right now. You can sit with the person next to you, introduce yourselves. We can make a little bit of noise in the Beit Midrash. Okay? Just no one start yelling at each other. That would be kind of bad for what we're doing. All right? I want you to go through and write down every question that comes up for you when you read that text. Let's first start by putting the questions on the table. Okay? Okay, we're going to bring the conversation back to the group. Before we get to what I'm going to refer to as chapter 2, okay, which is unfortunately the story where Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai did not keep to the basic principles of constructive conflict. Okay, it's important that the first thing we think about when we think about Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai is not the destructive component, but that they are the model of what's called Machloket L'Shem Shamayim. Okay, these are supposed to be the example for how two very different Jewish schools of thought, we're talking roughly between the years of 0 to 70, okay, interpreted the world in very different ways, but nevertheless were able to engage in what's called Machloket L'Shem Shamayim. Okay? So before we get into how they did that and what we can learn from it, first let's put our questions down. What do we come up with regarding the Mishnah? And again, by first analyzing a text, by raising questions, it's also an important component of any type of analysis of a conflict. Okay? We have our dilemma. First thing we want to do is just become curious and put down every type of question we come up with. So what questions did you come up with for this Mishnah?
What does it mean to be in the name of heaven? What is this? Can you have a conflict about what that means?
Okay, so why do we use the language in the name of heaven, for the sake of heaven? Can there be disagreement over if it's for the sake of heaven or not for the sake of heaven? Excellent. Other questions that came up.
What does it mean controversy will continue to exist? Why is it important for it to continue to exist?
Why would we want a conflict to continue to exist? I find myself, when I read this text, and I've read it many times, that I take like this double take. Okay, it's like, wait a minute. The conflicts which are for the sake of heaven are the ones that are going to continue? I would think a conflict that's for the sake of heaven, let it go. We're going to, if it's a healthy conflict, we're not going to continue to argue about it. It's the ones that we become so entrenched that we're going to continue to fight over forever. So what is it saying that a machloket for the sake of heaven is supposed to continue to exist? Okay, that for sure will become a key ambiguity that bothered the commentaries, but at the same time became the most important invitation for the commentaries being creative about what could be healthy about conflict. Okay, so we'll come back and relate to that. Yes?
We were brainstorming different types of arguments and trying to classify them as, would this be an example of one, or would this not be like an argument over land, or then we brought up arguments we knew about, like the argument over how to light the Hamkiyah, or how to make Kiddush, or something like that, and I think we came up with some arguments are about something greater than the people that are involved in them, and some are sort of about the person arguing that herself gets wrapped up in.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, the question is, all right, what defines a machloket categorically as being l'shem shamayim? Is it the topic? Is it the content of what we're talking about? I mean, you brought up a few examples, but I think your examples also raise another question, which people haven't asked yet, which is, what about Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai? Don't assume that the reader knows. Okay? Why is that the definition of Machloket L'Shem Shamayim? What about them are we supposed to learn? Okay? Another important question that people didn't ask, maybe because it's hard when we already translate the Hebrew into English, which is, what is the meaning of the word machloket? I translate it as controversy or conflict, but the truth is that the ambiguity actually starts there, that the word machloket in Tanakh did not mean disagreement. It didn't mean exactly separation. It was connected, but it meant in contemporary Hebrew the same word as a machlaka or a miflaga. Anyone know what a machlaka is? Section. A section, right? In a division, meaning if you go into a hospital, you look for the machlaka of, the department of, okay? Or in an army, we have a machlaka is a division. Now, the machloket of Hillel and Shammai meant the group of Hillel and Shammai as one singular group, the machlaka, will continue to exist. Why? Because they're for the sake of heaven. They have something that transcends a particular personality. Korach and Adato, Korach and his group, okay, which I didn't get into intentionally because I don't want us to focus too much on that, but that's brought as the contrast to Hillel and Shammai. That group, that political party of Korach and his followers were not l'shem shamayim, therefore they won't continue to exist. in another Mishnah in Perkei Avot, they use a very similar. There's another very similar Mishnah with just a different word. It's Knisiyah, l'shem shamayim, a gathering that is for the sake of heaven will continue to exist. Meaning a political party that has a strong ideology will continue to exist even after there's a change of leadership. We have this all the time in Israel right now. You have your parties that are very personality-based, and you have your parties that are very ideological-based. Okay, how long can a personality-based party really continue to exist? But sometime in the middle of rabbinic, of early rabbinic time period, around the time period of the Mishnah, the word machloket transformed from being about a group to being about a conflict. And then the translation becomes, well, why would a conflict continue to exist? And what does it mean, a conflict for the sake of heaven? And that was the invitation for people to be creative. Okay, so I brought for you 4 different interpretations. But what about a machloket should continue to exist? And I want to compare that to the basic theories of constructive conflict theory. All right, so I brought for you 4 interpretations of what will continue to exist about a machloket, found in 2 commentaries on the Mishnah. We're talking 15th, 16th century. There were many commentaries written on Perkei Avot. Okay, in general, there's not a lot of commentaries on the Mishnah. There are roughly 250, though, of classic interpretations throughout Jewish history written on Perkei Avot. Okay, so I'm only bringing for you 2 of them. One is the Bar Tanura, and I numbered the 4 different interpretations so you can follow along. What is supposed to continue to exist in a machloket l'shem shamayim, and what can we learn from that in terms of the principles of constructive conflict? So first of all, what continues to exist according to this first interpretation? The group will continue to exist, right? That is to say that the people of the controversy are destined to exist and not be destroyed. So is the disagreement between us going to continue? It could be, but is that what defines it as being, is that what he's referring to here? No. In my relationship with those who I love, we're going to have a day where we're going to disagree. And then we're going to have a day we're not going to disagree. But we're still going to be in relationship. And I'm not going to physically hurt you. And we're not going to destroy the other one. So what he's interpreting here is that it's not that the conflict is going to continue. It's not that our opinions are going to continue to be in contrast with one another. It's that our relationship and the people are going to be able to continue to exist. Now, what we know about Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai from other texts that speak exactly towards this is that even though they had very different interpretations of what was pure and impure, which affects can we eat together, okay? Because our foods are kosher and non-kosher in our language today, they nevertheless were able to eat together in each other's homes. The fact that they had a very strong disagreement over personal status questions, okay? Who is a mamzer, for example? They nevertheless were able to marry each other. There's something incredibly profound about the fact that these 2 groups wanted to be in relationship with each other. They wanted to place the role of their community and their interaction with each other over their separate and distinct interpretations of law. So what comes out of it, in my mind, okay, if we were to formulate this into a guiding principle for engaging in healthy conflict, what would it be? What can we take from this? Yeah?
Well, that you don't want to break off relationships with those people that you're arguing against, and also you don't want to hurt them. So, like, no yitzhak kind of stuff. Okay,
so first of all, if anyone takes out a weapon and starts shooting at the other one, you know you're no longer in constructive conflict. You're no longer in machloket l'shem shamayim. Meaning part of the ingredients of machloket l'shem shamayim was we're not going to physically hurt the other side, and we're going to have a basic type of respect. And you'll find that in any type of literature where they're going to say, all right, how are we going to set the right atmosphere for the healthy clash of ideas? Is there respect? And maybe in potential, even a strengthening of relationship that could happen as a result of healthy disagreement. I think what this first commentary is saying is put the disagreement aside, are you physically attacking each other? Because if you are, it's not l'shem shamayim. Now that's really important. Because if we think about machloket for the sake of heaven, I mean, think about that language. You know, a lot of wars, holy wars, are being waged around the world right now for the sake of heaven. And what they're coming and saying here is, great, you have a passion, you're passionate about your truth, you're passionate about your justice, you're passionate about your religion, but if you're hurting somebody else, that's no longer a machloket l'shem shamayim. So what comes out of it is that I want to encourage us to think that it's not just about what our interests are, what is our motivation, what is the topic that we're arguing over, but it's how we're managing the disagreement. So should we be engaged in conflict? Okay, that's one question, but the question is, how do we engage is what we can learn from this. Let's move on to the second commentary. Here it's a little bit more complicated. I'll read this one inside. I heard the explanation of the end, its purpose, and the matter that is needed. The controversy which is in the name of heaven, the purpose and its desirable end is to obtain the truth, and this continues to exist. What's he saying? What continues to exist in this interpretation? I think the truth that they agree upon. Because he writes, and I heard that the explanation of the end, its purpose and the matter that is needed, and its desirable end is to obtain the truth, and this continues to exist. So it's not necessarily the disagreement between us. It's not the two different opinions. We're not going to continue to argue forever. But if our purposes of engaging in the disagreement were what? Why are we engaging in this conversation? Because what's our purpose? We want to come to a right decision. We have a problem. We have to come to an agreement. And there are issues that we have to make a decision upon. Okay? In a machloket l'shem shamayim, when we go through a process that the purpose is to come to the right decision, whatever it is, that decision, that truth, in parentheses, will be able to be sustainable. In contrast, writes the Bar Tanura, that if the purpose of why I'm engaging in this disagreement is for what? To achieve power, okay? The love of victory, to say, ha! Boy, was I really smart in that rhetorical, and then I just totally showed how dumb they were. If that's the only reason why I'm engaging in the conversation, that is not a machloket l'shem shamayim, and that will not continue, meaning what is the result of that conversation won't continue to exist. So what's being said here is that the process for how we're engaging in our disagreements, that the end result of that, if the motivation is to learn and to grow and to actually not just win, that will be able to continue to exist. You know, this speaks to the very essence of machloket l'shem shamayim in the sense of constructive conflict, the healthy clash of ideas. That if we're really committed to what's the right way to go within a community or within an organization or within a relationship of a particular dilemma, and that our interest is not just simply being, I just don't want to lose face right now, right? You know, I had a certain platform, I promoted that platform, I really, really want to be able to show at the end of the day that I won. If that's where it is, then that's not going to end up being a machloket l'shem shamayim. Okay? And this connects directly into the third interpretation. The third interpretation, now we're switching over to the right-hand side, the Magen Avot. Please.
Controversy for the sake of heaven will continue to exist. Means that they will concede to each other, but they have no intentions to defeat the other, rather only to clearly establish the matter, and when the proofs of one are upheld, those of the other will be annulled. As we learned, the school of Hillel reverted to instructing in accordance with the school of Shammai.
Okay, and let's pause there. What continues to exist according to this interpretation? There was a disagreement. Okay? You and I, we had a separate opinion. What's going to continue to exist if it's a machloket l'shem shamayim? The disagreement itself won't continue. That's not what's continuing to exist. It's not the conflict. What's going to continue to exist is one opinion, because if it's a real machloket l'shem shamayim, you're able to admit that you were wrong. You're able to concede the point. I enter into the conversation with the acknowledgement that I might not know everything. That I'm going to walk out a different person because you have different knowledge and different experiences and different proofs. And if I'm open to actually learning something instead of just proving that I'm smarter than you and that I can win, then the result could be that only one opinion will continue to exist. You know, if I think about it, if I'm driving with my wife and we come to a, you know, what do you call, in Hebrew we call it a tzomet T, an intersection where you have to turn either right or left. Okay? There isn't like this win-win. We can't like, she's going to go to the right and I'm going to the left. We're in one car. We have to make a decision, and there are decisions that we have to do like that. So we could be extremely stubborn and say, I don't care what you show me. It could be the GPS, it could be Waze. I don't care. We're going left because that's how I planned it. That's not a machlok l'shem shamayim. A machlok l'shem shamayim is when, you just said something that was very different than what I heard. I go through a process of dissonance, and after my process, I've come out to the conclusion that you were right. This is an extremely important component that we'll find in all literature of what does it mean to engage in constructive conflict. Do the parties go in with the emotional and intellectual openness and the strength to be able to be modeh ala emet? They say in Pirkei Avot that a chacham, a wise person, is able to admit when they're wrong. Not to always prove that they're the smartest. I will say in parentheses, and this is a tough one, we only find Hillel conceding the point to Shammai. We have not found a time where Shammai said, you know something, Hillel, you're right. And that speaks to what you were saying beforehand about Hillel made sure to learn the opinions of Shammai and heard what he had to say, and therefore, after a certain moment, you might say, you know something, I'm not going to continue to promote my side because he's right. And that's why we accept Hillel's approach, because he tried to learn Shammai's opinion first. The fourth one, and then we're going to move on. The fourth one, David, I think you said this. Okay? You want to read that for us?
And it is possible to explain that the opinion of both will continue to exist, the one who forbids and the one who permits, because both are the words of the living God.
Oh, okay. Meaning there is two contradictory truths, but they both are correct. And they're both always going to continue to exist. There always will be a left wing and a right wing. In any particular culture, there always will be a spectrum of difference of opinion if it's a healthy culture, where there's an openness for difference of opinion. And the essence of Talmud Torah, of our text, okay, of our, I would believe, of our DNA of what it means to be Jewish, is this concept of understanding that there could be multiple interpretations of truth. Just to give you one idea of how this could be true, that both of the words of the living God, the commentaries explain, based upon other midrashim, that God gave every single halacha that it could be argued 49 ways pure and 49 ways impure. 49 ways it's permitted, 49 ways that it's forbidden. That every single child was trained in knowing how to argue 49 ways one way, 49 ways another way. You couldn't raise your hand in the Sanhedrin and express your opinion unless if you knew how to argue each side passionately, they didn't even know which side you're on. Because if you don't know how to do that, you have not fully understood the possibilities of the truth of the other side, and therefore, you don't have a right to really express yourself because you haven't really looked into the matter properly. And that's really core to constructive conflict. Am I entering into the conversation with an acknowledgement that you might have a legitimate need, a legitimate perspective, and that we might both continue to exist? Not always, because sometimes there's a conceding the point, sometimes we'll come to an agreement, but all of these, okay, and with this we'll move on, all of these and more represented what machlokes l'shem shamayim meant, and they all can be found in texts that describe the Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai relationship. So chapter 1 is Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai are the model for Jewish democracy. Okay? Democracy is based upon constructive conflict. Okay? John Stuart Mill, Adams, everyone mentions the healthy clash of ideas is what allows for a healthy democratic society to exist. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is when these basic principles were forgotten. And this is what happens. Mishnah and Shabbat, and I'm going to try to explain what texts are known and what texts no one has ever heard of. Okay, this text is known. People know the Mishnah. The Mishnah writes as follows. And these are some of the regulations enacted in the attic of Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Gurion when the rabbis came to visit him. They did a roll call and found that the disciples of Shammai were more numerous than those of Hillel, and they enforced 18 regulations on that day. Questions? What comes up for you when you read this that's unclear? How is it that Shammai became the majority? Is another question. I'll just say in parentheses, Hillel, really the vote went according to Hillel in the Sanhedrin because there were many more adherents to Hillel's group than there were of Shammai. Shammai was a much more elite and smaller group. And Hillel was a little bit more popular, a little more inclusive. Okay? So this is strange. Why did all of a sudden Shammai become the majority on this day? What else? What are they arguing over? What are these 18 things? Okay, one of the question is, who is this person? Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Gurion, and why are they meeting? I mean, it connects into why are they meeting in his attic, but what's going on? Okay, so now what I try to do is to actually structure the source sheet here in a way that reflects that there's machloket over what the machloket is on the day of machloket. Okay, so there's a lot of different disagreements. So let's take a look first at the Babylonian Talmud that spends several pages describing what the 18 issues were and what happened on the day, but particularly one scene is I want to focus on. Okay, it says as follows. They, Beit Shammai, thrust a sword into the study house and declared, whoever wants to enter may enter, but no one may leave. And that day Hillel sat in submission before Shammai like one of the disciples, and it was as wretched for Israel as the day on which the golden calf was made. What's going on here? What happened? When somebody takes a weapon into the Beit Midrash, which is supposed to be the safe space of a healthy clash of ideas, okay, and they thrust it into the ground, that's not a common phenomenon. That's strange. Now, but still, calling it as tragic as the day the golden calf was made? I mean, is that kind of, isn't that a little bit exaggerated? I mean, that's a pretty tragic day. That's Tisha B'Av. I mean, that's serious. So, but here, now I'll stress this. Did anyone actually get hurt on this day in the Babylonian Talmud? Physically, did anyone get killed? No. I mean, it was a little bit of a, I'm sure they all went home and told, their families, you will not believe what happened today in the Beit Midrash. But everyone went home. Not the case in the Jerusalem Talmud. Okay? Let's switch over to the right-hand side. The Jerusalem Talmud, which by and large is much less known, okay? The Babylonian Talmud is the one that people study. It's the one that people, do daf yomi about, and they know. And this is the retelling of a similar scene in the Jerusalem Talmud. They say that day was as wretched for Israel as the day on which the golden calf was made. Exact same language. It was taught in the name of Rabbi Yoshua Oniah. The students of Beit Shammai stood below them and began to slaughter the students of Beit Hillel. It was taught. 6 of them ascended, and the others stood over them with swords and lances. Now, there's a lot of thems and unclear language here. But what is happening? Did someone just take a sword and thrust it into the Beit Midrash and that was the end of it? What's going on? There was an actual fight. In the Hebrew, hogim. They actually, it seems, from the language, it seems like people were actually being killed here. Okay? Notice that it stood below them. I mean, what seems to be happening is that as they're on their way up to the attic, okay, that there is this kind of war happening down below, that the students of Shammai are waging war against the students of Hillel. Some of them are able to go up, some of them are not. And that can explain why is it that Shammai won the vote. Why did Shammai win the vote? Because there were more people still standing when it came time to vote, to raise their hand, that were belonging to Beit Shammai. I mean, it's amazing that they even bothered doing a vote. It's strangely like, one of these third world democracy situations where it's like, they got 99% of the vote. Why did you even bother voting to tell me you got 99% of the vote and there were no other candidates? Meaning, it's as if there's a democratic process, but something's very, very not democratic about this. Okay? This is as tragic as the day the golden calf was made if people are actually getting hurt. I didn't bring it for you in the English. I'll just mention to you in the Hebrew, I brought another sentence that goes on and says that these 18 issues, no one can ever cancel or nullify them. No Beit Din, no matter how great or in number or in wisdom, ever can be touched. And the reason given in Jerusalem Talmud is because Amdu Alehem Benafsho Tehim. They stood over these principles with their lives. This is, in my mind, an example of conflict prevention, that if we had civil war over these 18 issues, maybe we don't want to open that can of worms again. We're just going to leave it as it is, status quo. We'll have to come back to what that is, what the 18 were. But first, there's a machloket about how to read the Jerusalem Talmud. On the left-hand side, you open up the classic commentary on the Yerushalmi, the Korban Eda, 18th century Berlin, and he says, and they began to slaughter the students of Beit Hillel only if they, Beit Hillel, wanted to go up to vote. However, God forbid, chas v'chalila, they did not actually kill anyone, so it seems to me. Can't be. Lo yachol liyot. It's impossible that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai actually killed each other. And this is, as we'll see, this becomes a very, very, very dominant interpretation. That this is all metaphorical. I Googled just a couple weeks ago, this sentence of, and they slaughter the students of it, just to see what pops up. And a website called Kippah, that's kind of like a religious Zionist responsa literature. A student wrote as a question, I just saw this incredible thing that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai had a war. Is it true? And the rabbi goes on for a very long time and saying, are you kidding? No way. It's all metaphorical. It's just a war for the sake of heaven. But really they had a machlok Hashem Shemaim because we know all the texts. They're the model of machlok Hashem Shemaim. But if you look at the right-hand side of the page of the Jerusalem Talmud, the Pnei Moshe, the other classic commentary, writes that day, meaning that day was as tragic as the day the golden calf was made, because Beit Shammai killed students of Beit Hillel, as we will see further on. Now, what were the 18 issues that they could possibly come to such blows over? Okay? Now, I'll mention that in the Babylonian Talmud, there's an attempt of trying to figure out what these 18 were. Many of them have to do with laws of purity, impurity. But in the Jerusalem Talmud, there is a list that historians try and prove seems to be close to the original list. And this is brought in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived roughly 100 years after these events. And this is his list. I'm on page 5. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught, on that day they decreed on their, and this is referring to non-Jews, on their bread, on their cheese, on their wine, on their vinegar, on their sauces, cooking salts, pickled food, boiled foods, other type of salts, which I don't know what those are, their spelt, their fish, their language, meaning speaking Greek, their testimony, their gifts, their sons, their daughters, and their firstborn. Meaning all 18 issues dealt directly with, what do they all share in common? Non-Jews. Meaning here's an internal Jewish disagreement, civil war, if you will, over how open, closed to be towards non-Jews. If you can't eat their bread, drink their wine, eat their cheese, speak their language, and potentially, and there's some disagreement about what does it mean about their sons and daughters. It's talking about intermarriage? That can't be, right? Some people say this is actually talking about tum'ah, that you become impure by simply touching a non-Jew. So if you can't shake their hand, you can't speak their language, and you can't drink wine with them, what are we basically saying we want? Total separation. And therefore, Beit Hillel was arguing on that day saying, we don't want that. And Beit Shammai was arguing, this is where we're going. And on that, they went to war and they killed each other. Now, the question comes up that historians have been asking for the last 100 years, which is, when could such a thing have happened? When would it be that they're meeting in an attic of a guy named Hanani ben Gurion, okay, over how open, closed to be toward non-Jews, and they're all walking around with weapons. And the conclusion that they came to was, we must be talking about somewhere between the years of 66 and 70. Maybe this Ben Gurion is the famous Ben Gurion mentioned in Josephus as one of the leaders of the revolt against Rome. Okay? And we know from many other places that Beit Hillel supported the peace agreement, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is one of the founders, is one of the key scholars of Beit Hillel. We know the story about how he was snuck out of Jerusalem, and those who were in favor of the revolt tried to kill him, and until he eventually got Yavne and saved, the Beit Midrash. What's interesting is that scholars have pointed out in many different areas that Beit Shammai, while they weren't necessarily the leaders of the revolt, they strongly identified with it, and many of them might actually have been names associated with it, saying the only way we're going to be able to get our freedom back is by throwing off the oppression and the decrees of the Roman occupation. And that's why they're meeting in a place of hiding. Look, the implications in my mind are obvious. They don't even need to be stated. But the fact that Jew could actually kill other Jew over how open-closed to be towards non-Jews, how we proceed on political issues that are expressed through the most minute detail of halakha, as representations of different ideologies and different interpretations of the political and theological world, I think has profound implications for today, obviously. But before we get there, I want to just quickly jump 1,000 years to medieval time periods, okay? In the 10th century, the big machloket, the big disagreements were between two different Jewish groups, the Karaites and the rabbis. Who are the Karaites? What do they believe and not believe in? They did not believe in the oral tradition of the rabbis, meaning Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai were not sacred people. The opposite is the case. The disagreements between the Karaites and the rabbis were very, very strong. There were some places where it got to be so heated, each believing that the Mashiach was not coming simply because the other one still existed, that the Muslims often had to get involved in making peace between them. On the other hand, we do find moments in the Geniza that the Karaites and the rabbis continue to marry each other. So again, even their conflict went through different cycles, different phases. I brought for you here two Karaites that were the arch nemesis of Rav Sadia Gaon, who was the scholar, 10th century, head of the Babylonian Jewish Academy. One is Solomon Yerucham. Don't call him rabbi. He won't like it. Okay? Solomon Yerucham writes as follows. And the Pitomi, which is his derogatory nickname for Rav Sadia Gaon, and the Pitomi denied this, claiming that there was no war or killing of one another between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And I brought the Talmud of the people of the land of Israel, open up the laws where this incident is mentioned there. We don't have exactly where Rav Sadia Gaon might have actually denied this. I've been in touch with a former teacher of mine, Professor Brody, who's the world scholar on Gaonic literature, to try to find, because he wrote several poems against the Karaites. We don't have that line, but it seems very reasonable that there was indeed a polemic, that the Karaites are saying, your founding fathers killed each other over a machloket, and you're denying it? Look, it says it in the Jerusalem Talmud. Now it could be that in front of the Babylonians, they have the Babylonian Talmud, and they didn't consider the Jerusalem Talmud as authoritative. Okay, and the Karaites were often more focused around the land of Israel, and therefore they did know it. Nevertheless, there was something very important to them about this polemic. Take a look at the second one, Sahal, okay? Another Karaite, 10th century. And I'll just read I'll read it very quickly. And how is it acceptable to go on the path of the masses on all matters, and the Torah states, do not go after the masses to do evil? Meaning the rabbis are the majority, but we don't go after them, right? There's a lot to be said about this verse, okay, which is the cornerstone of democracy in Judaism. And also after the end of the time period of prophecy, the hand of the leaders was firm, and conflicts increased between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and they killed each other until the nation was killed in accordance to their desires, as it was good in their eyes. Not only did they kill each other, but their civil war overflowed into the rest of the community, and they were recklessly killing lots of people. Now, why is it so important to the Karaites to explain this? Why are they bringing this story back up?
To demonstrate that the whole process of the rabbis is fraught with evil.
It's flawed both in terms of ethical, moral high ground, meaning if this is how you treated the people, you don't have a right to be our leaders. And secondly, it reflects a very important theological attack, that you guys claim to have a direct line with God, this tradition that you call the oral tradition, and your disagreements were managed in a way that you kill each other. You lose your authority. And the rabbis, in return, denied it. Now I don't have Rav Sadi Gaon, I just brought you as an example Maimonides, which I won't read the whole thing inside. I'll just point your attention to the last few lines where he just says, and no disagreement fell between them, not even on one of them. There was no, it was actually a miracle. It was the one day in the Beit Midrash where everyone agreed with everybody. But this is very, very, very central to the rabbinic theology, specifically to Rambam, who didn't like machloket at all. He was very, very anti any type of disagreement. But definitely disagreement that they were hurting each other was very, very difficult for him to accept. Just skipping forward to 9 Adar. Okay, up until now we've been talking about these events. Did they happen? Did they not happen? What happened? The earliest mention of 9 Adar can be found in a Gaonic book, 9th century, called Hilchot Gedolot. And it writes as follows. These are the days that that one fasts on from the Torah. Okay? On the 9th of Adar, on the 9th of the month of Adar, they decreed a fast day because Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai had conflict with each other. They had a machloket, and therefore we fast. Now, if every single time, right, 2 rabbis had a machloket, no one would ever eat in our religion. What about the machloket? So what? They had a machloket. Why call it a fast day? This line is picked up in every single halachic book from the 10th century. It's found in the Shulchan Aruch, it's found in the Tur, it's found in the Raviyah. Every single halachic book, it's there. In the Shulchan Aruch, which I just brought you because people are familiar with the Shulchan Aruch, it writes, these are the days the tragedies befell our forefathers and it is worthy to fast on them. On the 9th of Adar, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed. They disagreed. Now, of course, what's going to happen? There's going to be disagreement over if it was a machlokes Shem Shammai or not a machlokes Shammai, meaning why are we fasting? So on the left-hand side, if you open up a Shulchan Aruch, you open up the Lavush, and he says, you should just understand, it was a machlokes Shem Shammai. We're not going to read it, we don't have time. It was a real machlokes Shem Shammai. But it was tragic because it was the first time there was a disagreement that wasn't settled in the Sanhedrin. Okay, it was the first time that the Torah was split into 2. And the fact that there was disagreement was enough of a reason to call this as if it was a tragic day. But there was no violence here. He's not connecting it to the events that we just described. On the other hand, of the Shulchan Aruch, you open up the Eliyahu Rabbah, 17th century commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. On the 9th of Adar, they disagreed, says it in one line. And 3,000 of the students died. When 3,000 students died, that's no longer a machlokes Shem Shammai. I don't care how much it's for the sake of heaven. It's not a machlokes Shem Shammai. How does he get to the number 3,000, by the way? Anyone have a guess? It's this week's Parsha. What was so tragic about the day the golden calf was made? How many people died that day? 3,000 people died. When Moses said, Mi Lashem Elai, and the Levites gathered together, and who do they kill? Their brother, their cousin, their father, their neighbor. Now, we don't have time to discuss this, but theologically this raises fascinating questions in terms of how disagreements are managed in biblical times and in rabbinic times. Because the rabbis saw this as tragic as the day the golden calf was made. The day the golden calf was made. And they associate with 3,000. This is not only in Eliyahu Rabbah, this is in a lot of texts. They mention the number 3,000. For me, it was important to bring it as a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, but it's also found in other texts. I'll just point out that there's so many different versions of this. I brought them for you in the footnotes. Many of them add on, and some of them killed some of them, right? And each side killed each other. When I saw this, and this is going to sound a little sick, I said, Baruch Hashem. Why? Because I'm really, really happy if we want to create a new international Jewish day of constructive conflict, that also Beit Hillel could have been radical and killed Beit Shammai. Because if only Beit Shammai killed Beit Hillel, it would be really, really hard to sell this across religious political divides. So in all the texts, they describe it as totally being reciprocal, meaning Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai equally killed each other. Maybe the Beit Shammai ultimately won, but there was an absolute civil war. I'll just point out also that Muslim scholars knew about this, okay? And one of the most famous Muslim scholars wrote that 28,000 died on that day. Okay, we'll let him say that. Just briefly, because we're almost out of time, on page 10, I brought for you a few lamentations, kinot, that were written in medieval times for this day, okay, that would be recited in the synagogue. And I lined them up from less violent to more violent. Okay, less violent is we're lamenting and we're fasting because there was a disagreement. Others say it was, look on the third to the second to the right, where it says, for the fight between Hillel and Shammai over truth was a disgrace to the Torah. And the final one says, and Hillel and Shammai, a dispute erupted between them, and many of them were killed. And that was found in a Sidur in the Geniza from the 10th century. Okay, so people knew about this, okay? But it was been buried under a lot of dust for about 1,000 years. Okay, people don't talk about it, and there's a reason why people don't want to talk about it, because it raises very serious questions about our role models. I just want to end this chapter 2, as we have to wrap things up. The end of chapter 2, which is kind of a depressing story, ends on a very, very optimistic note. Okay? And it ends with saying the following, and I'm on page 11. It says, in the future, the Holy One, blessed be He, will turn these days into days of rejoicing and happiness. As it says in Yirmiyahu, for I will turn their mourning into joy, and I will comfort them and make them rejoice from their sorrow, and so shall it be His will speedily in our days. Amen. Meaning, after all these tragic events, tragic days, you should just know that in the future, one day, this day will be turned from a day of sorrow and mourning into a day of rejoicing. So we took that pretty seriously, okay, as an important invitation of trying to write chapter 3. And chapter 3 is the story that we're writing right now, okay, which is what is the new chapter we're going to write about the 9th of Adar and this relationship between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Before I just say just a few moments on that, I have to do a little bit of what do we call it, brand recognition, okay, that in a 7th century hymn, a piyut written by Kalir, the most famous poet of Jewish history, he actually describes the love of Hillel and Shammai, and he refers to them as brothers, learning in the Pardes. Okay, that's on the first line. Pardes there meant a Beit Midrash, but a place where people engage in conversation. There's a whole lot to be said about were they really brothers, how they were buried together, and what does it mean that all their students were buried together on Meron, and how people used to go up in a pilgrimage and show honor. No other rabbis were buried together. It's the only group. So they were both the model Machlokes Shem Shemaim. It became a non-Machlokes Shem Shemaim, but as we remember them, it's like that. Just very briefly, and I unfortunately I couldn't get up the website, and that takes away from in my mind the presentation. So you're welcome to go on to 9adar.org to see really what happened. But basically, last Sunday, just over a week ago, really for the first time, we took this day that was not Machlokes Shem Shemaim and turned it into the International Jewish Day of Machlokes Shem Shemaim. We had hundreds of organizations from around the world that took shares in this vision. Okay, very much across religious political divides. Very right-wing organizations promoted it in Israel. Very left-wing organizations. Give me one. A lot of organizations also were participating in New York, throughout North America. There were secular schools, religious schools. The mediation centers around Israel were all participating and running sessions around this. The Ministry of Education of Israel had contacted us, and they're very seriously considering turning this into a Jewish holiday that all schools will participate in. There was even a small event in Panovich in Bnei Brak, okay, that we had 4 groups with ultra-Orthodox Jews. And what we did basically, just to talk about what does it mean to participate, is we created 18 ways people can participate, commemorating the 18 ways people killed each other. And first is fasting, which is not always the most popular one. Okay? It was popular amongst people that engage in social justice, because the concept of having the lack of basic needs and how that affects our ability to interact with others in conflict is something that can be very meaningful to people. But we also created, there are alternatives to fasting, such as fasting from destructive speech. So schools and organizations or individuals took on what's called the ta'anit dibur, meaning that doesn't mean you don't talk, it just means you don't talk language that's going to increase conflict. There was, people raised money for organizations that are promoting constructive conflict in their neighborhood. Prayer. Okay, we reached out to different paitanim, people who put together contemporary tefillah, to write what is the new tefillah that's going to be said in shuls and schools around the world on this day. And even eating, yes, I know that sounds a little bit strange, but you can't have a good Jewish holiday without some traditional foods. So we took, based upon a machloket in the Gemara and Shabbat, about how to liken the 9th of Adar. Beit Hillel said it was similar to nuts, honey, and pomegranate. Another Pardes shout out, because we're the pomegranate. Beit Shammai said, no, the day was similar to mustard, zucchini, and squash. And therefore we took the 6 foods, we put them around our Seder plate circle mediation table. and we cooked them together. And we had our recipes for machloket muffins and constructive conflict cookies. And we had a whole seudah that people did of what does it mean to eat contrasting foods, sweet and sours. Because as Jews, I think we only really have it become core to our identity and practice when we eat our values. Okay, and we have them and we talk about it. And then briefly, we had a lot of scholars across the different denominations in Israel and around the world contribute their divrei Torah. What are the sources, the texts that inspire them to engage more mindfully in constructive conflict? And there were a lot of people who were teaching, both in their schools or in their organizations, or just learning on their own. And then finally is practice, to challenge people to actually be a Rodef Shalom for the day. And that can mean signing an agreement within one's department or within a Moshe house or within a Hillel, that people put together, okay, how are we going to agree? What is the basic haskama, which is a core component of what Jewish communities would do for conflict prevention. So we have our Rodef Shalom agreement. Or how you greet people. The number one reason of what a Rodef Shalom is how you rodef to say shalom. You run to say shalom to people. So if we know on Rosh Hashanah how you greet someone, or on Yom Kippur, or on, Tisha B'Av, we don't greet. But how are we going to greet people? So certain rabbis wrote in, okay, what is going to be the term of how people say hello to each other on this day? We had tips for mediators and conflict specialists from around the world to send in what are their tips for how to engage if I'm party in a conflict. Or if I'm a third party, how do I help two people or two organizations get into more of a constructive process? Facilitation. There was a lot of groups discussing key conflicts going on in the Jewish world with professional facilitators. And then finally, or inviting in a professional conflict resolution specialist, a professional Rodef Shalom, where schools invited in mediators to come and talk about what that meant, or shuls invited in a specialist to run a program and to do some training, or actually maybe even work out some of the conflicts that we had. So in short, it's the beginning of what we hope at Pardes will be part of this movement that we're trying to do, which is, yes, we all have our very, very strong passionate for tzedek, a very strong passionate for our truth, a very strong passionate for what is our L'Shem Shemaim. But really, Machloket L'Shem Shemaim is when we recognize that not all of our motivations and our ways of handling things are L'Shem Shemaim, and that maybe the other side is also a little bit L'Shem Shemaim, and that only when we come to that understanding are we really engaging in Machloket L'Shem Shemaim. When we're able to balance our needs with the acknowledgement that there are other needs, and doing that as the essence of what every page of the Gemara is all about, I think only when we do that and do it in collaboration, okay, that everyone does it because it's not doing me or Pardes a favor. Okay, it's a vision that everybody can own and have it as their own. So only then, I believe that we can maybe hopefully turn this day, and not only this day, into really being a day of rejoicing and happiness and a day of Machloket L'Shem Shemaim.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.